and to actually have a sandwich to eat. Hopefully, this will be the first of many subsequent events in coming months. We have our regular regional commission meeting in September planned at this moment for the new facility at the Bennington Recreation Center, the UCS Bennington Rec facility, and the focus of that meeting is going to be on outdoor recreation. So we hope to have folks from different parts of Bennington County talking about different outdoor recreation opportunities. And that's September 16th. And then October 13th, courtesy of Representatives Bongartz and James here. Wave. Representatives, not to be left out, Representative Durfee there. They're sponsoring a couple of really interesting conferences this fall, and the one I've been working with Seth on is going to be a housing conference in Arlington on October 13th. And I think it's going to be really interesting. There'll be a lot more information out on it in the near future, but really trying to address kind of some of the nuts and bolts of how to address the housing crisis that our communities are facing. So, with that said, again, thank you to the folks in Manchester for providing us use of this space. Thanks to Jim Henderson again for delivering the food from Your Belly's Deli in Manchester. Thanks for GNAT for filming the event tonight. And that said, I'm not going to take it any further. And usually when we have a workshop on forests and forest resources, I point out the windows and say, look at we're surrounded, but all you can see is mist out there. Oh, I see a little bit of greenery in the background. But the point is, we live in a beautiful forest estate. Forest resources are so important to us for so many things, and we have some great people to talk about just why that is today. And to start it off, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Bongartz.
Thanks, Jim. And the other, Kathleen, when's the date for the...
November 4th is the Career Pathways Expo.
It's also going to be sponsored by the BCRC, helping us with everything. So thanks, Jim. And Dave Durfee, another rep with whom we share Sunderland, Shaftesbury, a little bit of Sunderland, is here tonight as well. So when this session started, and I found myself on the Natural Resources Fish and Wildlife Committee. And we started to have reps in from either the Department of Fish and Wildlife or the Department of Forest and Parks. I was, and I think I said this to both of you when I'll introduce in a second, I was astounded by the quality of the people in the two departments. The depth and just the intelligence, the caring is what really came across to me, the confidence in the caring. We have two of, I would say dozens of people like that here tonight, but the two that I think maybe we spent the most time with over the course of the session. And so state employees sometimes, on occasion, get shots taken at them for one reason or another. I'm not forget I said that. But I want to say that I'm deeply impressed by the quality of the people that we worked with over the course of the session in my committee. Michael Snyder is the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Recreation. I have no doubt the job is challenging, but I also think it's got to be one of the truly great jobs in state government. We're not here to talk about our state parks tonight, but we're not for 1 second, and just say that every one of them, and he gets the pleasure of being involved in them, is a little gem. As I think we all know, this a little gem within the fabric that constitutes life in Vermont. Commissioner Snyder is also in charge of forest policy. Well, maybe not the legislature, I guess, is involved in policy too, but he's a thought leader in any event in forest policy for Vermont. He makes the point constantly that we can have healthy forests only if we are engaged with them and we have a healthy forest economy. He's going to talk tonight about the state of our forests, the successes, challenges, and threats faced by the industry, and the health of our forests overall. Eric Sorenson, who's here also with us tonight, is an ecologist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's going to talk about Vermont conservation design after Commissioner Snyder talks, and its focus on understanding the macros and micros within the forests we see around us. As you all know, I can see a lot of people who work in the woods here, a lot of forests. You all know the forests are not ubiquitous. They can appear that way and just look up at the woods and it looks like woods. Well, it's much more complicated than that, as we all know. There are various ecosystems depending on things like elevation, soil types, microclimates, proximity to water, wildlife, and more. And that's what the Vermont Conservation Design is designed to really look at and understand and quantify. Although he always gives credits to others for the development of the conservation design, if it has a father, it's Mike Sorenson. So what we have, and we'll get a little bit of tonight, taste of tonight, is the opportunity to have both have the forest in production and the need to conserve parts for biodiversity, carbon storage, and other reasons. We're all working together to make sure we have a healthy forest economy and that we're conserving key portions of the forest in order to have old growth and ecological diversity alongside a very healthy forest economy. So I'm just going to let you guys take it away. So thanks.
Thank you, Representative Bongartz. I appreciate that introduction. Thank you, Jim. Great to see you all. It's always good to be in Bennington County. It's a trip for me to come down from Loyal County. I'm happy to do it. I hope that you folks here in Bennington County feel very well served by our Corey Cregan, our Bennington County Forester, filling a long and rich tradition of service in the county, begun in many ways by Jim White. Wonderful to be with you as well, Jim. I met Representative Bongartz this session and have only met him via the Zoom context in the square, so I was really happy to be here, but I'm exceptionally thrilled to find out that he has legs and everything. It's great to be with you here on the planning for the future forest and thinking of forest economy and forest ecology. These are all words that I really love because forest, incredibly important, valuable in so many ways. We hope there's a future for forests and us with forests, and it's probably going to take some planning. So it's a great topic for a workshop and engagement. And I don't think it's possible to have any of that without ecology, economy. They do have the same root, which is in home, eco. They're related, and there's the relation. The connections continue. This is not one or the other, and I'm really thrilled with the Regional Commission and Seth for envisioning a chance to come together and have a dialogue that includes both, because that's really the story here, and it has to be so. So thanks for your interest in it. I'm going to kick us off with a little bit of a primer or background, as Seth said, on kind of the status of our forests and the forest economy. I'm going to go real quick through a bunch of that. Happy to come back and dive into any of it deeper, but then I'm going to try to segue to saying the condition, what is the forest economy? What do we mean by that? And what is its role? Why does it matter? And what is its condition at this point? And where might it be going? And how does it connect to forest health, forest integrity, and sustainability, livability, and the quality of our lives? So that's the big point here, is that forests matter. We're really lucky. I think you can see, and even if there's some mist, you guys know what's out there, and we are indeed very lucky. The point I would begin with here is just to say that that forested landscape confers enormous public benefits. It's mostly privately owned, and it confers enormous public benefit, right? Untold, really. We have a sense that it's great, but it's this green mass, and that it's easy to forget the economy that comes with it, the economies that come with it. The forest economy, $1.5 billion annually, the tourism and recreation economies that are utterly dependent on it for the backdrop and kind of the natural infrastructure of those economies. It's a huge part of our everything, economically, and I think our culture and way of life. And yet, and I believe that you all know that inside, and you could probably do a fair job of convincing others that, yeah, there's a lot of benefits, clean water, habitat, diversity, all of it that comes from this forest, and priced and unpriced benefits. Here's the point. There's no guarantee, certainly, and not even any reasonable assurances that it's going to stay this way. And in fact, most of the signs are pointing the other direction. So we have this chance, and that's my big premise that I'd like to share with you, is we have a chance to get it right, and put some things in place, thinking together, thinking holistically about policies and how we approach stewardship of the land in a modern way that will ensure that the forest and the benefits it provides will continue. That's the whole point. And I appreciate your willingness to listen along here. If it suits you, sing out. I'm happy to answer questions as I can along the way. I want to make sure we get to Eric and then maybe complete full closure and dialogue as you wish. But, so with that, I'll jump in. Having conquered the technological challenge that was first thrown down, we're feeling pretty good at this point. We'll see how long that lasts. Again, a bit of a primer, I think, just on my piece here. We'll really focus on the forest economy, but please know that by training and by experience, really, and sort of by heart, I'm a forest ecologist who's applied himself in the real world of economy and politics, because that's where things happen. Okay, so here's the big premise. So I guess by that I meant I'm a little jealous that Eric gets to take the ecology part, because I would really like to do that part too. But we have a rare opportunity. Eric is a world-class ecologist who's dedicated his career here and has contributed massively. And am I allowed to say this? Eric is with less than 2 weeks away from finishing his career with Fish and Wildlife. So this is, as I understand, his last public talk. You are really lucky, and I'm honored to be able to share it with him. Can we just get to Eric now? How about that? So the point here is, I like to say, we all have thought we're Vermont strong. And I think we are. And I think Vermont is forest strong. And I really hope that we can all adopt that and adapt it into our lives. We are forest strong. We have enormous ecologic benefits that accrue from forests, from atmospheric carbon dioxide mitigation, climate resilience, flood resilience, water supply, water quality, water timing and control, air pollution control, habitat, connectivity, biodiversity. We could go on. There's an awful lot of ecological benefits that come from a healthy, intact forested landscape, and we have those, and we're lucky. There's enormous economic benefits. The direct $1.5 billion of economic activity through the forest industry in our state every year, and then another $2.5 billion in the related tourism and heavily dependent tourism and recreation sectors. So this is a real driver for the economy as well. And I believe it's part of our culture, our forested history. Trees and forests were the original native Vermonters since the last glaciation, at least. And it's the natural expression of this landscape. It wants to grow trees. As I was saying to Eric on the way down, some of you may know, there's a thing called like agricultural soils, forest soils, and like, pshaw, they were all forest soils, right? Before any agriculture. So forests are part of us, and certainly we've built a livelihood of our economies and our way of life. I believe it's cultural. I'd like to think we still have that, a connection to the land. Frankly, I would alert us all to that. This is one of the places where we're slipping. There's a cultural gap in the fewer of us are from the land, of the land, and truly understand the culture of working with the land. And I think that's really scary, and we need to pay attention to that one too. But indeed, we are forest strong, and just some quick facts here. We are the fourth most heavily forested state. Maine, okay, but New Hampshire and West Virginia, it really galls me that they're ahead of us on this list. I hope you'll join me. But 75% of the state is forested, and we're lucky. To put that in perspective, 20% in agriculture, which really does set us apart from New Hampshire. That's the difference. We have the beautiful bucolic fields that are bordered by forests, and I think that's makes an awfully nice mix. And only 5 developed. This is a great stat, and it would say, what's the problem? That's the issue, is that all of these are changing, and we're seeing change, particularly on the forested side, the first time in 100 years where we're actually losing forest land, sort of writ large, on balance. And that's not the sky is falling, that is just, we ought to pay attention. That's a significant inflection point, and we want to make sure we're holding on. So that should be a signal. And again, of that, 3/4 of the state is forested, but by far, some 80% is held in private ownership, which distinguishes Vermont from our neighboring states that have more of an industrial history, they have more corporate ownership, they have more government ownership. We are heavily owned by private individuals and families, which I think makes a difference, and it provides some challenges and some real opportunities for us. Some trends, though, in the age, demographics of ownership. I'll just jump ahead here and show you real quickly. The upshot here is really seen in these two. Sorry, it's a little awkward. I don't have an easy switcher here. But the point, I guess, would be that if you have the number of owners and the acres by age class, that's what we're saying here, that most of the acres are owned by older Vermonters, and more and more, there are more and more owners, which means the parcels are getting smaller. So the 2 points are parcels are getting smaller. We're not making any more land, but we have more parcels, so that means they're getting smaller. And the owners are getting older. Nothing against older Vermonters. I hope to be one someday, well on my way. But we have to think about the intergenerational transfer, and this has been identified as a real problem and threat to the sustainability of Vermont's forests. That's why we think about ownership and ages and what these people care about, and how do we speak with them, how do we listen to them, how do we change policy that is a way that supports them, their lives and their interests. Very important slide about decreasing parcel size, increasing age of our owners. Generally speaking, sort of the state of the forest, I'm going to put these all up. That's hard to follow for me. But generally, very generally speaking, Vermont's forests are in really good shape. So we have a lot of forest land, starting to lose it. We'll get back to talking about that. But what we have is actually in pretty good shape. It's kind of a late adolescent forest. If you think maybe Eric would chime in on this, I mean, it's 80 to 120 years old, kind of. It's sort of an average condition, I think is fair, and that's not very old for forests. And so it's sort of in this late adolescent phase, I would say. But generally, stocking is increasing. Tree crowns are generally healthy and stable. Trees are growing, and net tree growth exceeds removals. That's a really important stat, a beginning point for understanding anything about sustainability of our use of forest lands, is that our growth to removal ratio is still above 1 to 1. It's at 2.1 to 1. So we're growing twice as much as that's being removed annually, and that's a very important stat to just kind of track. And it means, okay, there's no real emergency there. So the stocking of our forest, the supply of wood and all, it's there. We don't have a scarcity issue. But we have some, it's effectively scarce because of some other issues, workforce, marketplace issues, et cetera, which we're going to talk about, and that's where the forest economy comes in, to the nexus with forest health, forest connectivity, and integrity. So there's some basic thoughts that we're in pretty good shape, I'd say. That said, we do have some serious issues to watch. The loss of the forest land, as I've signaled, is very important. The increasing abundance and incidence of invasive plants, pests, pathogens, so insects, diseases as well. These are real threats to forest health, sustainability, and in a big way. I don't have to tell folks in Manchester about things like honeysuckle, right, Jim? And others. So it's a real pernicious problem, and it's becoming statewide, and it's really a real threat. No doubt. Again, the more landowners of smaller parcels, the aging of the ownership, localized issues of over-browsing by deer and used to be moose, some localized dieback that we're seeing, mortality and dieback in some species, birch elevations, for example, after repeated various complex of factors that kind of diminish their capacity. Diminished growth regeneration failure, some of that's on us as foresters, and then the ever popular and others. There are several other threats, but those are the big ones in my mind that we have to hold in balance with that relatively good news of a lot of forest, it's in generally good shape. But boy, there's some things to pay attention to. So the idea here is let's keep a forest strong. Given that there's nothing in place to legal, economic, institutional framework that suggests we're going to hold on to forests. It's under threat. We're lucky as heck. It's somewhat accidental at this point, except for all the people who have worked and made it possible. And that's what we need to do, is focus on how do we stop at this time, take pause and say, how do we put it all together and make those changes? What are the changes necessary to have the legal, economic, and institutional frameworks that support viable forests, viable forestry, and a culture of forest stewardship in our state? We have to focus in big buckets when we think of markets and workforce challenges in the forest sector. Those are really problematic right now. A collapse in the demand for particularly low-grade wood. We'll talk more about some of these things. Loss of workforce, people who actually do the work in the woods. Conversion to non-forest, poor regeneration, combined or exacerbated by overbrowsing, also exacerbated by the invasives. So we need to deal with these systematically. And I'm just going to remind us all that we produced a report for the legislature in 2015, which is too long ago now, signaling this change, this first time in 100 years change in forest extent, some of these threats to forest health and integrity, and noted the real fact of fragmentation of forest land, the breaking of forests into smaller and smaller pieces, meaning that they become less functional as forests. As I like to say, really the best way to think of a forest, it's really better to think of a forest as a verb than a noun. It's a noun by part of speech, but forests are active, they're dynamic, they're functional, and that's really how to know forests, is by what they do. And we signaled in 2015 that what they do for us is really threatened. And we wrote a report and concluded that livable communities, functional natural systems, and the quality of life rely on maintaining large blocks of contiguous forests across Vermont's landscape and a viable modern forest economy. Not just hacking away at the woods, but actually thinking about it, applying adaptive, climate-smart, modern ecological silviculture, and a modern workforce, a modern marketplace to produce world-class durable forest products, energy products, etc. There's a real bright future that's possible, but we're not set up to achieve that future, and that's what we need to focus on. So we put that out years ago, and we're still talking about it, and we still actually haven't, we've chipped away a variety of the buckets of policy areas that we recommended. But I'm really starting to get a little nervous that we're just kind of spinning around, rearranging chairs in the Titanic here. The idea being that what we do now will have an influence on Vermont's forests for years to come. And I really do think that it's not a Chicken Little moment, but it's kind of like, hey, let's be smart. We really have a chance to get it right. And not everybody does. It's really true. So way back in 2015, we said, well, there's a few buckets really of policy development that we should be looking at. Outreach and education on forest values and benefits. This state does a remarkable job, whether it's people like Eric Sorenson and our county foresters like Corey working together with technical assistance and getting it out there to Vermonters. Professionals like Mike White, Alan Calfee, providing consulting services to landowners in a modern and professional way. And there's this cadre of forest professionals working with exceptional loggers with modern practice. We're really good at that, and we've actually helped do more of that with good information, and I think we should be proud. It's clearly not going to be enough. We got all-stars doing this stuff, and we're still losing ground. Increased landowner incentives to keep forests. Think current use. We've had continued appreciation and growing sense that it's the most successful and important conservation program in our state's history. It's a model for other states. We're really lucky to have it, and it's actually kind of holding it all together for us. So again, and we've tweaked that, increased some penalties, and we've increased capacity and eligibility for ecologically significant treatment areas within the current use program. So again, I think we've chipped away at a couple of these. We've also started to invest in strategic forest conservation. This state has a tremendous history of easements and acquisition for public ownership and access of important lands, agricultural lands, forest lands, wetlands, great history. This is about a more strategic and targeted approach, less responsive, reactive to opportunity, more thoughtful, and, well, I said the word strategic. That's Vermont conservation design, frankly, and Eric's going to walk you through what that is. And that takes a big step, if we can implement that intelligently, towards this third bullet. And then we come to this piece that I think brings it all together. That's support for sustainable forestry and the Vermont forest economy. The idea here is a little bit counterintuitive, and I'm going to ask you to stick with me. We're going to save forests by cutting trees. That's the idea. That's what we need. Not willy-nilly, not just whatever, but again, a modern, thoughtful approach that's connected to Vermont conservation design, that's connected to targets for sustainability, benchmarks of practice, and holding people accountable and doing it right. We do it actually, do a lot of it. We just need to make that the thing. And we got to adjust to a changing marketplace that has global influences beyond our control. and sort of roll up our sleeves and think differently about a modern forest economy. I'm excited to get to some slides to tell you what I mean by that. I'm going to go quickly here. You're not going to miss much here. This is basically saying Vermonters support the idea of a working landscape. They say they do. And I'm counting on them actually supporting that and supporting some new thinking about how we consider permitting and regulation of sawmills, kilns, trucks, logging, etc., if we're going to hold this all together. Because Vermonters say they're for it. Clearly, they've spoken loud. All right, what is the forest economy? It is a wildly complicated web of interactions based on forests and largely commodity goods that come from forests, and including other goods like specialty goods, craft goods, even some food goods. But so it's this wildly complex web based in large part on a kind of commodity approach. Think about firewood, wood chips, pulpwood, a high volume of low-value material kind of floating the rest of the smaller volume of really high-value, value-added furniture, flooring, wood products that bring a big price. We grow that stuff really well. High-value hardwoods, for example, turned into high-value products. That's our strength. It's just a low-volume game, and you can't have it without the high-volume game of the low-value products that is like weeding the garden, but we sell the weeds in pulp, firewood, and chipwood. Those markets have collapsed. Other than local, home use of residential firewood, which remains about a third of our harvest, that's strong. The rest is kind of collapsing, and that's what we're going to zero in on here and try to talk about. But it's this idea of, I think the forest economy is a value chain. Think of it as starting with the forest, and then forest landowners. These are the elements of that chain. Forest landowner, forester, logger, trucker, receiving mill, like a sawmill, or a pellet mill, or a firewood processor, or a chip producer, and then secondary manufacturing. The boards that come from a sawmill, they go to a manufacturing plant, they get made into cabinetry or flooring, right? So, or many other products. Energy wood coming off and going in to make electricity. We have 2 wood-fired biomass electric plants supporting the grid in the state with base load power, Rygate Power Station, Burlington Electric. And then we have thermal applications of wood energy. A third of Vermont school children go to schools heated by wood. We're a national leader in that regard. Our Capitol complex is heated by wood. This is a great story, and we don't tend to talk about it, but it's really connecting that instead of dead dinosaurs from halfway around the world, pulled up from deep below, we're using a renewable source that puts local, our neighbors to work while heating our buildings. So these are all elements of that value chain, which are the value adders that we tend to kind of lump all into one. I want you to understand that it's amazing the diversity of products that come from Vermont forests all over the world. And it's this complex web, and not simple to kind of wrap up and say, well, let's just tweak that and all our problems will be solved. I really want to get across the point of complexity, and I'm going to share the next slide, which is courtesy of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and Helen Keller, that attempted to put a graphic together to sort of describe the web of connections in the forest economy, and I think she did a great job because it just makes my hair hurt. There's no way of following it, and that's the point. Right? It's just a complicated web, landowners at the base. Can't say enough about that's the basis for it. And all these interactions that happen, and so many chances, frankly, for things to go wrong. Whether it's going wrong in the way of understanding or going wrong in some actual practical way. And many opportunities there for us to pay attention and think critically and strategically about how can we pull this together and reinsert it in a modern way. Really, to me, we talk about working forests, working lands. The land has been working since before there were mills or wool or milk. The land works. That's this idea of forest as verb. It's functional, and it's always been working. So when we talk these days about the working forest or the working lands, we're actually talking about the people. Families that work that land, and the businesses that work that land and make it possible to keep it in its forested or agricultural state. We're really lucky, and it really comes down to people, and I'd like to think that's sure a challenge, but it's why we have a chance, because we can build this bright future on our forests by vitalizing the people that work and supporting and vitalizing the people who work and have a profitable chance to work those lands for all of us, to hold those benefits together. Snapshot of the forest economy, not insignificant. 13,000 jobs, totally, it's actually $2.5 billion in total economy now. When you add in, like particularly the tourism and recreation, and then we're connected to the regional forest economy, which is another piece of the complexity that we don't control, and there's other jurisdictions. But again, we're in this regional economy, and it's significant. That's the point here. To maybe drive that point home, forest and wood products, jobs, labor income, basically look to the far, the total is output. I'd call your attention to the forest economy, agricultural economy. The goddess of agriculture is on the Golden Dome in Montpelier. It's not the goddess of silviculture. I might suggest it often. Can we get a thing going on that? It's we really think a lot about agriculture. It's a fraction of the land, and it's a smaller economy. I'm not down in it. It's a really great synergy we have, and I'm all for it and support it, right? I'm just trying to say, can we get a little piece of that? A lot of love for farmers, as we should. Put food in our body every day, particularly with the modern food movement. We need that same culture of support for forestry, for loggers. My first job out at UVM Forestry a million years ago was in Sweden. I don't know about reverence, but there's certainly respect for loggers, and that's just embedded. It's an important job, and you're valued for doing it. And I dare say that's not really the case here, and it needs to be, if we're going to have a player. Go ahead.
Is sugaring included in this?
Yep. I'm sorry. This can get. There's all the economic analyses. They usually call it out and say include sugaring, but then again, the ag side claims the sugaring, and I don't want to do the double dipping. So it's usually in, but that's why it says forest and wood products. And this one has pulled out the syrup production, which is significant, as you know. Relatively long-term snapshot, broadly speaking, of harvesting in the state. It's cyclical, and you can tie some things to tie these increases and decreases to market forces, global forces. We're part of that global cycle. I just think that's important to keep in mind. I give you some sense of the total forests harvested and converted all to cords, whether it's board feed, saw timber, or tons of pulp. We converted it here into cords just for ease of comparison. The big chunk is fuel, is mostly what we harvest. And then some whole tree chips going into electric generation or heat generation. Pulpwood, a fifth, and all of it goes out of state. We don't process any pulpwood in the state. Keep that thought in mind. Well, you brought up syrup, sugaring. What right-thinking Vermonter would pull all our taps, dump them into tankers, and send them to Maine for value adding? Anybody? To have it turned into syrup somewhere else? No, but that's what we do with our pulpwood, all of it. And now they're closing, they're collapsing, and we're left the farthest ones away, and they're saying, we don't need your pulpwood. Where do we go with it? It supports all that good silviculture to produce all that other good stuff, including recreational trails, habitat enhancement, water quality protections, right? We are really in a bind here with this going away, and it's going away. This is the real money. Saw logs and veneer. It's what we're really good at. That's still our strength, and we still have luckily some anchor mills in this state that do an amazing job of processing high-value hardwoods. We need to hold on to that. So we need to attract new. We need to have new products, new ways of doing things, and we really need to hold on to the ones we have. They're lighthouses in a terrible storm right now, all of these facilities, and we need to support them. This is that story from 1990 to 2020. The number of mills in the state has just dropped precipitously. And for a while, production kept up with it. That's a nod to the incredible work ethic of Vermonters, but it couldn't keep up. And eventually, we're starting to tail off, and we're losing our place. And the opportunity to do good work and to keep forest. People need to have an economic mechanism for holding on, paying the land holding costs, passing it on through generations, and we're losing that. So Since 1999, really early 2000s, it really started to drop out. We've just seen pulp mills across the region closing, and now biomass facilities, the electric generating facilities in other states closing. Not sure that's coming back. We have the two that we're holding on to barely, the two wood-burning electric stations. So this is the big finish on the sort of general forest economy piece, is that we're still a net exporter of wood, and that's good. It doesn't all have to be used in Vermont. We can be a supplier to others. But it's changing. We're starting to, we import, we send none to Canada, to Quebec, and we send a lot to Quebec. We didn't bring anything back. And we're starting to send out more China, Asia, and to other states, which is not bad. I'm a landowner. It's nice to have a market, even if it's going to Canada, but we should have that value adding here, right? We're just sending it away to be someone else to take advantage of it, and then we're buying it back as finished goods. Really love to see us think differently about siting, placing, permitting these facilities, these value-adding facilities here, to keep that money here. And history has shown us that wood is good. We are utterly dependent on it. There's never been a time in human history where people haven't been utterly dependent on trees and wood. We're incredibly lucky to have such access. And what it's shown us also is that people have to use wood and wood products. And that closer you use those wood products to where the stump was, where they grew, pretty much everything's better. And right now we're kind of going global and just shotgunning it. And that's crazy. And we're way too small to compete. And so this is our unique competitive advantage. It cannot be outsourced. And we need to think about rebuilding a modern forest economy with a culture and a workforce that's trained and supported to provide it. And we actually have a chance. That's the big idea here. I think I talk about the collapse of the low-grade market. Well, wood heat provides part of an answer to that. And it's a bright spot. We're starting to see a growth in people heating their homes, their businesses, collections of buildings, industrial scale, district scale, heating with wood. And we're seeing, we're optimistic. The comprehensive energy plan for the state refers to that with a goal to shift from fossil fuel-based heating, which we use a lot of, to local wood-based heating. It's not the answer, but it's part of an answer. And it's a really good example. You've got Vermont Wood Pellet in Clarendon as the only pellet facility, drawing from about a 50-mile radius. That's great. We should have one of those in every county, at least. And sort of rebuild that way and do it ourselves. And not just to keep it all here, we're going to need to export, and maybe we can attract entrepreneurs who say with that Vermont brand, with our quality of stewardship of the land, we can sell a range of wood products into the global marketplace at a premium. We better, because we can't produce anything. We're not the least cost producer of anything, and that's what the global marketplace rewards, the low cost producers. And that's a real bind for us. We have to think differently about the costs we put on the production and any that we can avoid, because we have that chance. And I guess the point here is that what we call modern wood heat or advanced wood heat, what that means is it's clean burning with respect to the atmosphere and children breathing, and it's efficient with respect to the fuel source. It's highly efficient, not a wood boiler out the back, belching particulates. And so, great reasoning for why we want to get there, and we have incentives. Legislature's been great about, we created an incentive program, a sales tax exemption for modern wood boilers that meet this threshold. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Just thinking, what are the barriers to people using this stuff? Used to be there were no pellet, bulk deliveries. Now you can get bulk delivery. That's really great because we need to move those things to create that new modern forest economy. And I think the wood energy we see as a piece of keeping that low-grade material here and turning it into a productive value-added use that also, by the way, replaces fossil fuels. And it's just win-win all over. Because forests are the antidote to climate change. It's our best solution, and we can support them this way. So just, again, permitting and regulatory costs, access to capital, workforce, labor issues, trucking issues, the collapse of the low-grade markets. These are the big things that have been cited by report after report, smart group of people after smart group of people saying that's where we got to fix. And remember that dizzying array of arrows and connections. We have to fix it just within that kind of complexity. And I frankly think we're up to it. And that's what we concluded was we have to ensure that forest landowners can get economic value from their forested land through policies that promote sustainable forestry and develop and create markets for Vermont forest products. So that's the charge here. And we do that, we're going to hold on to this landscape that does so much for us. Things we're working on, in supporting and improving training for loggers. This is connected to the workers' compensation issue, which was identified for decades as prohibitively expensive, way in Vermont, way out of whack with the rest of the states in the region, and prohibitive. And it was causing problems in the workforce and profitability for those who were working. And we've gone a long way towards fixing that by creating a logger safety training program that emphasizes safety, a culture of safety. I want to give a nod to our former deputy, Sam Lincoln, who really took this on and cracked a nut that lots of really great, smart people worked hard on, literally for decades, and made no progress. And in 4 years, Sam managed to put a program together that, the net of it, it's really complicated. The net of it is immediate 15% reductions in premiums for loggers and a reduction in claims because of the increased safety training and professionalism. And that's an example of just kind of going at it hard, bringing it all in. He brought everybody in from labor and commerce and brought people together who'd never talked before and figured out a solution that worked for Vermont that wasn't going to work in Maine. Or their solution didn't work here. So again, that infrastructure, which I include the human infrastructure that supports the forest economy, it's collapsing, and we really need to think differently. I would say this, in the permitting realm, say Act 250, local permitting, a sawmill, a modern sawmill has a conservation effect. It should not be treated in the permitting process like box retail or even a residential development. It has a conservation effect. Logging is exempt from Act 250, as it should be, below 2,500 feet. But where do you take the products of that logging? Into a heavily regulated system that's not competitive. So we've got to think differently, I would submit, about how we think about that realm if we're going to rebuild this economy. And that's what we mean here, that infrastructure, we need to improve, hold on, improve, and modernize, and we need to have a culture that supports entrepreneurialism in this space. Again, the modern wood heat thing has real promise. We think there's promise for expanding our markets. We have high quality wood. We have a good story to tell of family ownership and stewardship. We believe that will bring a premium in the marketplace. We should push for that. And we also want to see and promote the connections that we have, as I keep speaking of. This is the natural infrastructure for what's emerging as a world-class recreation and tourism economy. And we need to figure out those linkages and maybe have mutual support within them. With that, I'll pause and leave it for my part for now. And thanks for your attention. And remember, I'm just the warm-up act. Eric is the real drum. So thank you.
I tell you, Mike is a hard act to follow, and I don't have anywhere near as many facts as Mike does, but I have something I'm really excited to share with you. And that's this idea of a Vermont conservation design. Just a little bit more about my interest in this. I've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Department since 1996, and like Mike said, next Friday is my last day, and one of the things I'm going to miss most is this kind of work about thinking about Vermont and what it is now, what it can be in the future with our sort of common decisions. The Vermont Conservation Design is something that we've come up with, a lot of people involved, but to look to that future, of where we could be. Just look through those. Mike's mentioned all of these. In a forested state, I mean, the forests are our ecology, they're our society, they're the places we recreate, they're the places we get products, and they're places that we have peace of mind. So they range across the spectrum of features. I wanted to show just sort of, sorry that this ends in Canada, it doesn't include Canada, but I wanted to just show you sort of a snapshot of what forests look like in our area. And for this and the next 3 slides, the colors just indicate areas of forests or any other natural cover. So you can see the Finger Lakes are in there and Lake Champlain are there too. But these are chunks of forest and other natural habitat that are over 20 acres. And it's going to go up in size. And I want you to just look at the pattern of change. So over 500 acres, you can see there's not much left in the Champlain Valley. And most of northern New York disappears other than the Finger Lakes. There's over 2,000 acres, and the Adirondacks. What's this? Is that the Catskills? Where are we? No, Catskills are here. Allegheny, thanks. And these are those cool ridges in Pennsylvania and northern Maine. And then if you go over 5,000 acres, we're down to, and this isn't the forest, that's the Quabbin Reservoir. So you get a picture of what's left. And if you think about how important forests are, most of the things we associate with forests, we associate with large expanses of it, whether it's operability or landowners that are able to work their land, or whether it's wildlife and their ability to move. So that picture of large chunks of forest is sort of a framing element to me on how we think about what the issue, one of the issues is. This is all I'm going to say about forest economy because I know nothing about it. This is me doing the only work I did on our little timber frame barn that I'm really proud of. All the wood came off our land. And the only comment I'll make about forest economy is it cost me more to build my little barn from wood taken off my land than by buying it. And again, I don't know the answers. Mike and you guys know the answers to many of that, but that bugs me. And I wish it didn't, I wish it wasn't like that. But I love the barn. So this is relevant. I don't mean it as just sort of like a boring slide. The conservation of our fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont is what we're charged with doing in our department. And if you think about it, that's a pretty enormous task. It sort of encompasses everything. Forests are in there, I would say, under the habitat part, but you can't get away with protecting fish, wildlife, and plants without protecting forests. So it's sort of a driving factor for the work I do, and this is the threat. These are the threats to that, and you can look through those. The only one I want to talk about separately is the last one. Because of how different it is now, that it's happening so quickly compared to the last times we've had climate change. And it's having these direct effects of things like species moving north. But there are these compounding effects too of people are, have anybody noticed how many people are moving to Vermont and buying property? There's an increase in the population, which, I like people, but there's a threat there to loss of habitat and fragmentation of forest. And they're moving here because of how nice it is. That we have lots of water, unlike the arid Southwest, and that we don't flood like Long Island. And again, nothing wrong with those places, but those are the places that are experiencing problems. And places like Vermont, and I've seen Minnesota also called out as, lots of water, lots of greenery, and nice people too. So it's a compounding threat of climate change. So the thing that's different, we've had climate change before, but the thing that's different is what we've done to the landscape over the last 300, 400 years. It used to be that these illustrations are from 12,000 years ago to 500 years ago. And during the last post-glacial period, species could migrate, whether it's plants or animals, can migrate pretty much unhindered. But now we have roads, and Vermont is actually still pretty good, but there are places like, especially eastern Massachusetts, where migration is difficult there now. It doesn't happen the same. The other thing that to keep in mind about climate change is, it's hard to see these colors, but blue is beech and brown is hemlock. And from 12,000 to 500 years ago, we think about those species occurring together now in the same forests. But 12,000 years ago, they didn't even overlap. And it took thousands of years for them to come together into something that we now think about as kind of a community that occurs together. And the same with oak and pine. There were times when a lot of the pines didn't overlap with the oaks, and now we see them overlapping a lot. So we have to think about climate change and species migration as independent movements of species over time. But we have to figure out how to make that happen in a landscape that's really much more fragmented than it was. And by fragmented, I mean just roads and development. So this is sort of the heart of the conundrum. If we have some 24 to 45 or 50,000 species in the state, we don't even know many of them. We don't know what they are. It's actually impossible for us to come up with a plan if we treat them individually. It's just overwhelming. We can't do that. So we need to come up with another way to do that. And the idea that's been thrown around for decades, actually, is this idea of a coarse filter. A coarse filter that if we can identify a set of features, and those features provide the habitat needs and for many other species, then we can sort of bring along the species by focusing on a smaller number of features. And the original sort of idea was natural communities, which has been my work, which are associations of plants and animals that recur, like the wonderful rich northern hardwoods forest here on Equinox, or the spruce fir forest on the mountain tops, or the rich fens that are around here. Those are natural communities that are, you can picture, this alluvial swamp, it's got alders and all these other things, but it's also habitat for wood turtle. And that black spruce swamp in the Northeast Kingdom is good habitat for spruce grouse and this really bizarre moss that only grows on herbivore dung in spruce swamps. And you could take that out to expand that to the thousands of species. But the problem is that those coarse filters of a natural community here and a natural community there aren't big enough. Because we're talking about landscape scale changes now, and we're talking about forests that cover thousands and tens of thousands of acres. So that's what the Vermont Conservation Design is about. It's trying to figure out what those set of coarse filters are that are going to be most effective at protecting most of the species. So it's a coarse filter approach. The idea is that it uses simple and recognizable features. And I'd say something like a forest lot or a riparian area along a river are recognizable. If you live in Manchester and you walk to the edge of town and there's a chunk of forest and you know it goes for 1,000 acres or 100 acres or 20 acres, you know that you're entering a forest lot. It's a place, and that place, regardless of size, has values and ecological values as a forest. So it's a place that we can relate to and recognize. And I only mention that because there are a lot of other designs like this that use intensive models, and sort of models provide sort of a red to green gradation, and those kind of gradations are hard for us to work with. But something like these forest blocks and riparian areas are easier. It says Vermont Conservation Design, but please don't think of it as conservation as we will buy land. This is about how do we thoughtfully manage and steward land for now and for decades and centuries and millennia, hopefully, to come. So a lot of people involved in this project. And this is just sort of jumping to the end. There's a lot more I want to tell you first, but this is a map of what that Vermont conservation design looks like, where everything on there with a color is something that we've identified as a high priority for conservation. Again, conservation in the broadest sense. Let's keep it. And the key idea about this is if we can keep that, all those places in colors, and not that the places that are white are meaningless, they're very important too, but if we can keep that, we can keep this ecologically functional landscape, a place that's intact, that's connected, and that's diverse, that will allow species to shift over time in response to climate change, and will provide a lot of other benefits that go with that. So this is the quick dive. I'll try to go faster on some of these to give you a sense. There are lots of reports, and there's a website that you can look at all this map data if you're interested in. We've broken those coarse filters into two major scales, landscape scales and these natural communities and habitat scales. And I'm going to go through these 10 or so things quickly, and there's just a couple of ideas about species. So those are those main landscape scale features, and in each of these maps, the darker color indicates those highest priority features. There's that full conservation design, and you can see the full conservation design in the background there. So those are the 4 and plus another. So the idea is, how do we maintain the functions of each of these? If, you see, where are we here? Down in, see, there's Dorset, so we're down in here somewhere. If you think about those largest, most important forest blocks, there aren't any big ones in the Champlain Valley, so we pick the best ones that are there, like Snake Mountain. Those are the places where there are wide-ranging animals thrive. There's lots of stuff happening on the ecological scale with processes in these big chunks of forests. Air and water quality, flood resilience. That's why those are so important. And for each of these, I'm not going to go through these for any others. I just want to mention that we give these really non-prescriptive guidelines of what it means to maintain function. The one with the arrows pointing to is just north of Route 4. I think of it as the Blueberry Hill Forest Block. And it's a really important one. But the idea is, in this block, there's Route 4 going through. What we want to do is avoid permanent interior fragmentation, like that house, which is about a mile up the road, about a mile long driveway, going right into the center of the block. And it doesn't take many houses like that to drastically decrease the functions of that forest block. And so that's the kind of thing that I think we need to avoid. We need to limit development to the extent we can to the margins of the block. And we need to maintain forest structure and distribution of age classes. That means manage the forest appropriately for reasons that Mike spoke about more than me, because it's a way to keep landowners there, to keep it from being developed. And we need to minimize invasive species. So those are kind of really generic things, but there are things that are actually applicable when we start looking at what a development project could do in terms of its impacts. So connectivity blocks, as compared to these interior forest blocks, you can see that there are patches of white in between. These connectivity blocks form a set of stepping stones, of smaller blocks that species can use in sort of movement across the state. And you can see where there are pinch points. I can't do that anymore, can you? Like going up there from the Worcester Range to the Northeast Kingdom, you can see there's some, we'll talk about these a little later, like these pinch points going from the Taconics over to the southern Green Mountains here in the Vermont Valley. And so all those smaller blocks of forest become even more important for this function of providing connections from one to the other. This was a really easy one. What piece of running water or standing water is not important? They really all are. And so when you talk to fisheries biologists or aquatic biologists, unlike forest blocks where we can say some are more important than the other, you can't pull out one piece of river or stream or lake or pond and say it's less important. So that's showing them all. But we already treat those with some level of respect, I think. And there's a special feature of those, not just the water, but places where you have especially streams or rivers, and those riparian forests or riparian wetlands next to the river. And especially in places like the Champlain Valley that are highly developed, with agriculture in that case, if you think about connection between blocks there aren't the blocks, which are shown in yellow here. There aren't blocks to provide that connection. So in places like that, Lewis Creek and Otter Creek and the Lemon Fair River and the associated riparian areas provide that connection that allows species to move across the landscape. They're important everywhere, but they take on a separate, sort of important meaning in those sort of agricultural areas. This was a really complicated part of this project, but in one that sort of has this new recognition. Physical landscape diversity is geology, it's elevation, it's slope, it's aspect. People also talk about it as enduring features. Features of the land that don't change over time, or change minimally. They're always being worn down or maybe reformed by glaciers. But the idea is that if you think of those physical features as being a stage, and the species are moving around on the stage, are the actors. The idea is that if we conserve that entire physical stage, that we're going to conserve many of the actors. And this is one that has less of a time scale, or, I mean, it's timeless in that it provides a place for those species to move over time. And these are just sort of examples of what physical landscape looks like, but it's everything. It's the slopes of the southern greens, it's the escarpment, it's the rich soils on the equinox, it's all of that. And then this one, in some ways, it's not really a large landscape feature, but if you think about how you get from one of those stepping stone blocks to the other, we start to think about sections of roads as being things that we have to conserve. And it's not that we change how we manage the road, other than putting in guardrails along the edge could be a problem. This is one little section of Route 100 in the Waterbury Stowe area, where it's this major connection between the Adirondacks and the maritime provinces. And it's a half mile or so, quarter of a mile or so of road that we think of now as an important place to keep undeveloped on both sides for occasional moose crossings or whatever the species are. And we now have a map that's like this that shows all those likely road crossings statewide. Every road in the state are sort of assigned a value.
Unlike, if I could, Eric, unlike many others, this one, the land on either side is to the west is Mount Mansfield State Forest, and
right.
To the east is C.C. Putnam State Forest,
right.
Public land.
And the problem in this case was, geez, it's hard to point, is this little block there is becoming more and more developed, and what to do with that one little block that's like that stepping stone between those two big chunks of mostly public land. So I want to jump to natural communities. So this is a finer scale of those forest filters. And my favorite is the natural communities, which is what I've worked on for my career. And those are assemblages of plants and animals that reoccur across the landscape in certain physical conditions, settings, and are, I mean, it really is sort of the natural habitat in Vermont. These are the places, like this is in the Pollitt Hills, this is a fen, I forget if this one, I think this is probably in Calais in my hometown. But these are really important set of forest filters. And just to give you a sense what some of those look like, montane spruce fir forest on the left, boreal outcrop on the right, Mesic oak northern hardwood forest, this is at Merck Forest in Rupert, a red pine and pitch pine forest in the Rutland Town Forest, a burning sandplain forest. There was a fire set because it's a fire-prone community. It's hard to get people convinced it's okay to burn forests in Colchester, though. So that was kind of a risky business. Dwarf shrub bog, Peachum bog, part of the Groton State Forest and one of the premier bogs in the state, and a red maple black gum swamp. Black gum is this really cool tree. We have some about 600 years old. They have some in New Hampshire. It's the only thing they beat us on. 900 years old in New Hampshire. Oh, that alluvial shrub swamp again, and then the West River, the river cobble shore, and a river shore grassland. And the point in showing you these is, I think for each of these places, you can picture that there's a set of species that are going to use it, and that's important. Like this is all these tiger beetles that just hang out in cobble shores. This is a fun one. We have, I think Mike referred to our forest as adolescent.
Late adolescent.
Late adolescent. I think of them as middle-aged, and I don't know why, but I think of them as mostly middle-aged. And
Go with Eric.
either way, I mean, they are, in some ways, I don't mean this wrong, I put myself well into the late middle-age group, but they are, in a lot of ways, less interesting ecologically and less important ecologically than young forests that have a set of species that really need them, and old forests that have all these ecological connections that we are just starting to understand. And what we have now is a landscape that's dominated by those late adolescent to middle-aged forests that are really cool, very important, but not what we need, or not all what we need. So one of the goals is to come up with targets for how much of each do we need. And those targets are set by biophysical region, Southern Green Mountains, Vermont Valley, Taconic Mountains down here. And based on the types of forests that we expect to be there, the types of natural disturbance we expect, and how much of each we know we have. Right now we have way less than 1% old forest in the state. We have a lot that's coming because of things like wilderness areas, so at some point they will be old forests. So we're about halfway to this target of 9%. We're about halfway there with lands that are categorized as some place that's not going to be harvested. But we're also way short on young forests, as best we know. But that's a really hard one to track. We don't have any way to look at it carefully. I mean, UVA is awesome, but right now we don't have the ability to track how much young forest we have there. But there's a woman in Forest and Parks who is working on that now, coming up with a sort of a model, something that we can apply every few years when we have new photography to look into that. So those are fun targets. They're fun to work with. Oh, the point that I want to make about that, especially when we're talking about forest economies, is those are small amounts. 9% old, 3 to 5% young. And what it means is there is this 80, I can't do the math, 80% in the middle, that those are the forests that we should be focusing on managing for whatever you all, foresters, decide is most appropriate to get the products we need. Aquatic habitats, I said you can't prioritize them, but there's some that are like way cool and really important for certain features, like high elevation streams that are where the brook trout are hanging out when climate rains, or the lower sections of the major rivers that flow into Lake Champlain, below what's called the fall line, that's that drop in elevation that prevented species from migrating upstream. So there's still remnants there from the Great Lakes and even from when Lake Champlain was connected and was a salty sea. Wetlands, that's another one. Wetlands are important. We know all the functions they do. It's a relatively small percentage of the landscape, and we tend to take care of them, although we also do lose some wetlands every year. Grasslands and shrublands, this is an odd one because it's not a natural habitat in Vermont. Grasslands are something that we've created by agricultural lands, but as the agricultural lands are abandoned, there are a set of species, especially birds like bobolink and savanna sparrow, upland sandpiper, that those species are declining. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't try to keep them. At least some we can maybe think of them as a lifeboat, a section of the state where we manage strictly for those species. And that's what those dark yellow areas are. Not those entire areas, but picking 7,500 acres in those areas that we manage for those species. And then in the lighter color areas, or this tanner color, that's where we work with farmers to delay mowing in some places so that a brood of bobolinks can be fledged. Bats have taken a beating in the last 10 years with white nose syndrome. We've lost 95% of the little brown bat, which used to be really common. Most of our bats are endangered species now, and there's some sign of rebound. And I mean, this is a habitat. It's not just about bats. It's about all the other things that are down in those caves that we don't know about. There's one in this area. I forget what it is now. Maybe one of you know. There's some arthropod.
Heels, right up here. Not heels.
But besides the bats, there's some little arthropod that's in those underground waters here.
Yeah, it's in that cave too.
Is it in the same
It goes
cave?
down 3,000 feet.
I mean, we don't know about that stuff, and in some ways these aren't at risk, other than us doing things like introducing a fungus that we don't know what all it will do. So that's those features. I just want to mention the species part of it, because we need to talk about species. The goal is that these force filters and those force filters capture most species. We've done some tests, not very rigorous, but analyses to look at common species, and we haven't come up with any common species that aren't captured by that set of force filters. And so far, in the analysis we've done, about 50% of rare species are captured too. So what that means is that we can drastically reduce the focus that we need to place on certain species so that we can work on those species that are rare and not work on conserving species that aren't rare. So here's a really rare species, and this is the kind of thing that I think is important for us to think about. This only occurs on these calcareous, calcium-rich, seepy slopes at Smuggler's Notch. It's the only place it occurs in the state. But I would say there's nothing for us to do about this species. That's a protected place. All kinds of stuff happens there. It's incredibly brutal weather, wind and rain and ice slides. But this species is fairly common way to our north, in places like Labrador, and it's probably going to blink out here at some point as the climate warms. And that's the kind of thing I don't think we need to worry about. I mean, in some sense we can say it's sad to see it go, but it's okay as long as it's got a path north. And we should think the same about species moving in from the south. I think we have tulip poplar that is here in Bennington County now, which is, I think it's actually listed as an endangered species in Vermont right now, which in some ways is a little crazy. And it's crazy because if you go to Massachusetts, not far south, it's everywhere. But that's okay too. I mean, we should think of it as rare when it first gets here, but over time we should think of it as coming through and moving in. And so I think we don't want to think about climate change and these species in a state scale. We want to think about them as how do we make it possible for species to move over time and not try to hang on to some here or not try to pull some forward. We need to worry about bringing invasives in, but this is one way I don't think we need to worry about. Here's the kind of species we do need to worry about, and there are a fair number of these. This is my former boss. He retired a couple months before me, Steve Perrin, and he spent a lot of his career working on these spiny soft shells. They're an aquatic turtle. They do have this really flexible shell. They nest on these cobble beaches along Lake Champlain, and partly because of us, raccoons love these beaches, dig up the nests, and eat all the eggs. And so we have to do this intensive management to keep them around. And this is the difference to me, is this is one where we are responsible for the trouble that this species is in, and we can take the action focused on this species and what we need to keep it around. And what Vermont Conservation Design has helped us do is, Steve knew this all along, that we needed to do this species, work on this species, but it helps us focus on what other species we need to engage our sort of limited cultural and financial abilities to work on. So that's all. I just want to take a step back now and look at Bennington County for, just to give you a sense. I didn't put on here where we are, so where are we? This is
northern quarter of
where's, okay, we're up there.
yeah, with that dark red.
Up where the valleys fork there.
Dark red.
Right, so this is just showing, it's kind of a messy map, but it's showing houses and roads. And I think of that as our footprint. There's more to it than that, but these are the roads, Forest Service roads that separate those forest blocks. But what's cool is we've got a developed valley and 2 mountain ranges that are largely undeveloped. This is the kind of thing that is a risk, you know, when we start pushing farther and farther into the hills. If you look at our the forest blocks here, I've got the acreages on here. This one's 51,000 acres. This is 93,000 acres. There's 50,000 acres. This is Equinox?
Yeah, that's Grass Mountain and stuff.
Oh, great, okay, oh, we're up there, aren't we? That's 19,000 acres. So, I mean, these are big chunks of forest. And those are the things on the forest block side that we really want to focus on in this area. Like, how do we keep those things intact? And Green Mountain National Forest is got most of those covered. And a lot of these are privately owned though, too. So this comes back to that issue of how do we support private land ownership in these places. If you look at connectivity in this area, how many of you know Doug Blodgett? Yeah, Doug worked on this for years, and there's still, and there's a lot more on the ground knowledge than a map like this shows. But if you look at the valley here, there are these few places across the Vermont Valley where you can come up with connections. The green are those road crossings, and these smaller blocks in the Vermont Valley. Those places are a really important place to focus on keeping connectivity. The same thing down here in Pownell, from what's this ridge called that the college owns? Pownell College is down here in Massachusetts. Williams College, and then over to the Dome on the Forest Service line. But keeping those connections is really important, and a tool like this helps us focus on where to do that. And then physical landscape diversity in this area. I really need to go to a point with this. I'll use it. Oh, there. This is the escarpment. That's one name for it anyway. The steep slope that defines the edge of the Vermont Valley from the southern Green Mountains, and it is rich with all kinds of biological diversity. Partly because of slope, but because of the bedrocks that combine there, and partly because it's been this area that's been inaccessible for a long time and has a really interesting suite of forests along it. Another one are these enriched slopes. Rich Northern Hardwood Forest is a fairly common community in Vermont. The largest examples in New England are here on Equinox. There aren't any other places other than in northern New York where we have large areas of rich forest like that. The same up in this area. And then, the Precambrian Plateau is the bedrock up on the southern Green Mountains is this really, really ancient rock. And there are these pockets up there that are sort of these lowland depressions that are, again, in that case, not really diverse, but unusual. So they're features to think about. And then the last one are these small hills that are down in the valley. There are very few places left where we have calcium-rich hills that are not developed. And those places are rich with biological diversity too. Last one of these I just wanted to mention are these old and young forest targets. And the Taconics, the Vermont Valley, and the southern Green Mountains, you can see the targets for these, the target acreages for the southern Green Mountains. There's a lot of that already addressed, or it will be addressed as the wilderness areas become old. But I didn't talk about this before, but when we're looking to establish old forests, a 20-acre old forest is really nice, but it's not very stable. If you have a big windstorm, it could blow it over. So the goal is to have some of these in large patches so that they're more resilient to climate change and to those major events. Again, you can see the acreages for young forests there. The Taconics, smaller numbers and smaller patch size just because large patch sizes aren't available there. And then the Vermont Valley, where there isn't much forest left, pretty modest amounts of each. But useful targets, I think there's something for us to aim for, and we're working on how to get there. So I'll just end going back to this slide. That picture of what this area is, this intact, connected, and diverse landscape that allows species to shift. I'll just mention, I don't need to go through all these, we're using it for a lot of different purposes now, whether it's targeting land acquisition. It's actually partly of how we get funded for wildlife conservation in the state through state wildlife grants. It's informing these regional connectivity efforts. This is the stuff that we were assigned this project, and I sort of did it as a science geek, and I'm fine with that. But after finishing it and thinking about it, it's so clear that these forests, ecological connectivity, interior forests, all these features are much more, they have many more values than just for biodiversity. It's that sense of place and sense of Vermont and economies as well. I've been really excited that the Vermont Conservation Design has been received really well in the legislature, in our agency. It's been complemented from other states, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's not something that has regulatory teeth. It's something that is a vision of what we can do. And it's a vision of a future. It's a vision of a future that we make happen as citizens. We have to push to make it happen because there are a lot of hard choices in here. And the first one to me is landowners. That this is, Vermont is, again, it's 80% privately owned, and this is only going to work if we enable landowners to make decisions that make it possible for them to hold on to their land and make it possible for them to make decisions that are compatible with maintaining ecological function and keeping their land the way it is. It's not something where you can pick and choose, like, no, I only like interior forests and not pick the rest of them. We need all of these features. If you pick just interior forests, you lose connectivity. If you say, I just like young forests and not old forests, then you lose the value of those endpoints. I do think this is a way to sort of look at Vermont in a bigger picture and kind of unify a lot of different aspects of conservation. Some organizations will say, we are only going to work on certain features, and others can work on others. And one of those is working on how do we keep forests in production so forests can stay as forests. Again, Mike spoke much more about economic values. And again, just it's one more reason to keep forests as forests. I think that's Mount Tabor, looking across at, I think of it as South End, that South End part of where the two watersheds separate, right? Which one goes south? That one goes south? Otter Creek and Batterkill, is that it? That's it. Mike, you should come up here too so we can talk about stuff. Thanks.
We do have a few minutes for questions. Anybody has questions, please?
Eric, how did you, remind me, maybe you said this before when we were in the committee or whatever, but how did you end up with a 9% for old growth and 3% or whatever it is for young? How did you determine 9% is the right number?
Sure. And the 9% is, we use two figures. 9% is a target if you consider the whole state.
Yeah.
The target is actually 15% of those forest blocks. So that translates to about 9% of the state. Let me do the easy one first, young forests. We can look back at pre-European settlement is nothing we can ever get to again, but we can look back to that as kind of a benchmark of what forests were like and how they behaved. And at that time, there was a great study, Lorimer and White in Maine looked at natural disturbance events and what those do, whether it's fire or wind or what are the other ones, hurricane, single tree knockdown of trees, all those things. And those point to a range of 3 to 5% of forest in a young state as sort of a natural background condition, with it being more in spruce fir and less in northern hardwoods, a little bit in between with oak pine forests that burn. So that's the easy one. That's a pretty set target. The old forest target, if you look at their numbers and look at ages of something like 150 years or above, 50, 70% of the forest was above that age. So we can't get there. So the goal of 9% of the state, or 15% of the forest blocks is the way I like to think about it, is what we think, and with some confidence, that will give us a large value, a large, let me say this, try to say it right. We have confidence that will give us a lot of the ecological functions that those old forests provide, and provide that sort of continuity into the future. But it's a guess. It's not a solid number. I should say, it reflects the same targets that Harvard Forest has come up with for their Woodlands and Wildlands project, and what's the other one? There's another one that, I can't remember the other one, but that number they've come to it several times. But it's not a sure thing.
I have a question. Mike, what is a bunch of town officials here and local residents? What are a couple of the most important things we can do in our communities to help support the forest economy? Real tangible local actions.
I appreciate the question, and I don't think it's like, well, here's the little recipe, and it's got to work for you and your community. But it's things like kind of the supply end, like the market demand, and ask where your wood comes from. Want to use local wood, and then realize that you can't get it, and that. And start to think about, well, how can you? That means supporting the people who are engaged in that supply chain, that value chain. Local plans that reflect the importance of the forested landscape. Consider that. We've created guidance for communities and planning, land use planning. So use those. We've got models. I'm sure you're aware of them. I think it's pretty good work that's about holding it together. But on the economy end, it's really thinking differently about what those businesses do. And again, that concept that they have a conservation effect, maybe we could think a little differently about even the nuisance aspects that come with some of these processing facilities. It's tough. I don't want it next to my house. Who does? But we want that, and that's how we get that. So I think I wish I could be like more prescriptive. Here's the steps. We've worked at this hard. It's really that culture, the demand, interest in local wood, and understanding that you can have it here, and then supporting entrepreneurs, creating an environment where entrepreneurs will respond and say, hey, I want to fill that need here. How do you do that? You're local officials, think about this stuff more than me. Like, I'm asking to think that way. You tell me what are the things that you can do. I'd really like to spread that around. That's helpful.
I have one more too. It's like one of your maps of the forest blocks. You showed. This just came to mind because of the area I'm familiar with, but like the Grass Mountain area south of the Battenkill extends well over into New York State. So it's like just in general around the state. How do you work with other states, counterparts in other states on the conservation design stuff that you've developed in Vermont that relies on some of those connections to the other states?
We don't. I mean, it's like the classic cartoon of engineers designing bridges from two sides of a road, two sides of a river, and they don't quite meet in the middle. And other states have taken somewhat similar approaches, but I don't think there are others that have done Vermont conservation design. But there are regional efforts that do. And like a lot of our connectivity work in this is informed by work that the Nature Conservancy has done, looking at pathways and pathways for connectivity. So those are the most important things. But this should be a regional, regional beyond Bennington County regional. I mean, it should be like something that's done across the Northeast. And there's actually an effort, John Austin in our department has been working with New York down to, I think, as far as Pennsylvania and then up to the Maritimes, looking at just connectivity. So, I mean, there's another organization called Staying Connected Initiative, cool website that looks at those connections. But you know how state government works. It's hard for us to get a permit to go to New Hampshire for a visit. So.
Jim, you know, I think you bought supper, so you get at least 3 or 4 questions.
Question. You mentioned about 80% of the forest is owned privately, and it's an aspirational goal to keep the forest. But what kind of policies can towns or the state put in place to encourage that?
Well, I'll say one thing and let Mike answer most of that. Use value appraisal is the best thing we have. I mean, use value appraisal allows landowners, I'm one of them, to benefit from a lower tax rate if I manage my forest and keep it that way.
And full disclosure, that's how I'm able to do it as well with my woodland enrolled in current use. I agree, it's by far the most important. And so we gotta support that, and then what else? Acknowledging the public benefits that accrue from private lands, which is, you know, appreciating access for recreation, treating it with respect. I mean, we got to take care of the people who provide it. The policies, that's what's trickier, you know, because we are a nation founded on private rights, and it's really important here. It's something I really pay attention to. And you know, Eric didn't show you a map of we need this parcel and that parcel. It's the things, because that gets another level of where policy gets very treacherous about we need your land to do this thing. We need to make it so that your land, you want your land to do that thing. And so that's what current use is a great example of. And I think, to me, it's about having a culture and an economy locally based on the land that is, again, a little counterintuitive maybe, but that's how we're going to protect it. All the policies that result in that, that's what I think we need. It's like that, not regulatory policies. Sam Lincoln, former deputy, he taught me a bunch of things. This is a great point, and I really want to give him credit for it. If the land use decision about the fate of your land is happening at the zoning board or at the Act 250 District Commission, it's way too late. That needs to happen at the kitchen with Corey and Alan and, you know, forest advisors that are trusted and knowledgeable. And what are your options? And let's build a better toolkit. Because regulating them at the end is not how we're going to get there, whether it's for the family landowner or the business that operates in the woods or on forest products. So that's that mindset, thinking differently at the start about the value of this landscape and the people who own it, and creating an environment where it works for them. I know it's a very general answer. Trying to get more specific.
I'd like to go back. I still think UVA is the very best thing, but there's a problem with UVA. And that's that there's no permanence to it. And as property values go higher, and as the relative cost of taking your land out of UVA decreases, and I can't speak to numbers, but that becomes even less of an impediment to doing so. And so to take land out of UVA and develop it is it's not a permanent solution. I see it as sort of the best thing we have now and a stopgap solution, but it's not permanent.
Well, I'll go that far too, Eric. I agree. It's critically important, but it's not permanent. And it's kind of a band-aid in that we assess property taxes based on the developed potential of the land, not its current use for these really important things like ag and forest. That's crazy. Why do we do that in the first place? Maybe we could back up and all think differently about ad valorem taxation. That's complicated by the connection to the education fund, and reimbursement to towns. So it's not so simple, but I would agree, like permanence and maybe a different approach to land tax, property tax. It's no longer a proxy for wealth for many, and it's way more important. So, you know, I have a lawyer friend, if you'll indulge, like he's really smart, he's kind of a shark. He could be a corporate lawyer. He chose to be a do-gooder. and help, sort of the little guy. So our property tax system is basically tantamount to if we had an income tax that said, Mr. Attorney, you could be a corporate shark attorney generating this much income, so we're going to tax you on that, even though you're just this do-gooder in Vermont. That's the analogy I would use. Like, what? Why would we tax my forest land? Because it could be developed with views of the White Mountains. It should be taxed for what it's doing. It's providing access for recreation, carbon dioxide sequestration, habitat, biodiversity, connectivity a little bit, right? So changing our approach to taxation. Representative James is on the Ways and Means Committee. Too bad she wasn't here for that little rant.
Dave's on the Ways and Means Committee.
Oh yeah, that was you. It's you.
Everyone was a rant.
Excellent. Boy, I screwed that up, didn't I? It's not exactly a radical or foreign or new thought. I mean, and I hope Representative Durfee will respect that I did acknowledge it's complicated. It was not like just flipping a switch. There's a lot of reasons, but it kind of goes all the way back to that. I don't know, can I put you on the spot? Any thoughts?
Well, I think that your point about shifting education funding from property to income makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons. So it's consistent with your rant and well received.
Great, thanks. And I'll leave, I mention it because I know that's a complication. I don't pretend to know the answer, how that would work or what would be better. I'm just allowing that. It's easier for me to say than to actually do it because of connections to the ed fund and things like that, which kind of boggle my mind.
To me, a lot of this comes down to how do we end up with something that's stable over the long term. So a stability of economy, a stability of nature, and a stability of our culture. Because I think we're well past the idea of thinking we can continue to grow endlessly. I mean, that's just not possible. And so how do we get to that in an equitable and fair way?
As long as we're on the current use thing, I'll mention this, is that it often does come up in the committee in particular when we have to consider the cost. It's often said to be 60-some million, kind of the cost for current use. Totally fair. Of course we have to consider the cost of the program, but if we're doing so, we also have to consider the benefits. And that's what I always say in committees, like, can we also talk about these colossal benefits that come, that should be in the mix. End of rant.
Okay.
I had a question, Mike, about the pulp, the loss of the pulp markets, which I'm guessing isn't coming back just because paper globally is not in as much demand or expected to be in as much demand. Is that
right? A bunch of drivers for the collapse, including the move to the digital. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic and everybody working remotely. So right, the graphs of the precipitous drop in the use of paper goods is something else. It's mitigated somewhat by the increase in packaging, all the Amazon stuff arriving on your porch, et cetera. But yes, so that's been the case. It's a big part of the driver. There's some others, but even with a return in some sort of use of paper, I think the thinking is they're not coming back, and they're tens and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to create. So that we're not building those here anytime soon, I don't think. So we want to look to other technologies, like wood-based insulation seems to be emerging as something that could use that same kind of supply, provide the same outlet from the woods, but go into weatherization and a modern sort of insulating approach. That's kind of sounds exciting. There's some biofuels that are emerging that could use that same facility even with a strap-on kind of additional component that could turn into that pulping material into something else. That's more promising, I think. Is that what you're getting at? Is could we have those here? Or?
Well, just what the alternatives, what might take up that?
Yeah, I would think it's this mix of the modern wood heat, expanding our use of the thermal applications of heating spaces in an intelligent way, with the emergence of, it's not going to get it all done, some new products and new markets for those new products using low-grade wood. A big chunk of it I didn't mention, but it goes to like industrial timbers, pallets, and ties, railroad ties, mat, what do you call it? These mats for like crane mats. There's a lot of our pulp, our low-grade wood that's not pulp, that's going there. all the pulp has gone elsewhere, but particularly that softwood pulp. But like, there are these other low-grade markets, and we need to kind of hold on to those too. So there's some traditional low-grade markets that are smaller volume, but could, in aggregate, could kind of help fill that lost market demand. Does that make sense?
Any last question? No, we're ending almost right on time, which is remarkable. So we're still good at this in-person meeting thing. So thank you for that. I want to echo Representative Baumgart's comments at the beginning, and just say how fortunate we are to have such good people working in state government. So thank you, Mike, and especially thank you, Eric, for your years of service, and congratulations on your retirement. And I would also just like to add my thanks to the people in this room for both coming to this meeting, and for, I know a lot of you do work in this space, and really appreciate your work implementing these good ideas locally in Bennington County. So thanks to everybody.
And I would echo that. Thank you again for your interest coming out. Plenty of things to do that you come and be part of this. Thank you, and be in touch if you have ideas or even follow-up questions, or man, you got that wrong. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe not so much on that last part. I'm willing. Thank you.